Hello, everyone. I'm glad you all could join us this Friday evening. We have another webinar filled with valuable information for our attendees on Fheps, a rental subsidy, which stands for Family Homelessness and Eviction Prevention Supplement. Here to present tonight is Vanessa Adegbate and Charles Alvarez, who are both attorneys with Legal Aid Society. Also, Susan Van is here, a senior staff attorney at Legal Aid Society. She's here to chime in whenever she feels like, or to answer questions as well. We're so glad to have them here tonight with us. And thank you, Legal Aid tonight, for joining us. And Vanessa and Charles, y'all can start your presentation.
Thank you, Jakari, for presenting us and having us present today. So if we can just actually have the slide up, we'll begin.
Sure, absolutely. One moment, please.
Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Vanessa Adegbate. I'm a staff attorney with the Legal Aid Society. I've been in the housing practice since that of January 2017, and I'll allow Charles to introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Charles Alvarez. I'm one of the staff attorneys at the Legal Aid Society, and I'm part of my office's Fheps team for Brooklyn. I work in our Brooklyn office, and I've been there since late 2014.
So we're going to go to the next slide. So just so you know, the Legal Aid Society does have something called a Fheps team, which is just comprised of a number of staff attorneys throughout the boroughs that essentially thwart any Fheps issues or anything of the matters. So we actually included all of the attorneys that are currently on the Fheps team, and I believe one paralegal as well. So my name, Vanessa Adegbate, I'm in the Bronx. So those are just all the email addresses. And then if you put @legalaid.org, you can just feel free to send us an email or just at this point, just send it to Palante, which will then funnel it through us. We can go to the next slide. So what or who is HRA and what does it have to do with Fheps? So I think a lot of people just get very confused when it comes to just public assistance, when it comes to various rent subsidies for several reasons, primarily because there are a lot of different acronyms that are used throughout the whole process. So just kind of wanted to make it clear for everyone exactly what and who HRA is, so that we are using the proper terminology so that when you are going and filling out certain applications, you're equipped with this terminology. So the Office of Temporary and Disabilities is notoriously known as OTDA. That's actually the state program. So that essentially is a state agency that oversees programs that are intended for eligible low income and disabled families and individuals. So you can see OTDA is at the top. And then when you go down to that of HRA, HRA is essentially the agency, it's the local agency that oversees the programs that come through OTDA. And it's specifically for HRA. So while you're in New York City, you could talk to somebody who's in upstate New York and they don't know what HRA is, again, because it is the local agency that oversees public assistance as well as various rent subsidies. And then finally, you have Fheps. So Fheps is a program, it's a rental supplemental program that is oversaw by HRA. So when you do file an application for Fheps, you are filing an application with HRA. Again, it is a state-sponsored program. However, it is HRA that is the local agency that oversees the process. So we can just head to the next slide. So there's Fheps A and Fheps B. Today's presentation will primarily focus on Fheps A, which is essentially as though you were just coming on to Fheps for the first time. Again, Fheps is the Family Homelessness and Eviction Prevention Supplement. So we have Fheps A, which is meant for those who are essentially It's for those who are trying to stay in their current place of residence, for those who are trying to move out of shelters or move because the current apartment rent rent does not qualify. And then we have Fheps B, which is something that is essentially for those. It's a much more limited, and it's something that's only certain community-based organizations are actually commissioned to do to handle those applications. Oftentimes it's that of home base. So we're just gonna move on to the next slide. And Charles, you can take over at any time. Let me know.
Sure, I'll take over. So first I want to talk about who can receive Fheps and who can't. And we're just talking about apartments that you can use it in. Tenants who live in NYCHA units, tenants who already receive an ACS subsidy, which is unfortunately just for $300 a month. And in general, with certain exceptions, Section 8 recipients, all of these tenants are not even eligible for the Fheps program. Fheps is really meant for tenants who are in private housing, who live in housing that is unregulated. We'll go more into the requirements later as to what you need if you're living in an unregulated apartment. It's also meant for tenants who live in rent stabilized and rent controlled apartments. There's also the category of apartments known as Mitchell-Lama apartments, which have their own set of regulations and rent controls that apply. And then tenants who are in receipt of SCRE or DRE. Those programs really only apply to rent stabilized, rent controlled Mitchell-Lama apartments as well. But just for clarity, we included that. DRE is the program by the city to freeze rents for people with disabilities. And SCRE is the program that the city has that will freeze the rent for any eligible senior citizens. Next slide. So we'll go over the 7 major rules for eligibility. Next slide. Just so everyone knows, there are a lot of minor rules, but because this training is meant for sort of a general audience, we're going to go over the major rules only. So the 7 major rules are that the household has to have, at least one person in the household has to have cash assistance. So an active public assistance case with HRA, and there has to be one minor at least in the household. Family must be facing homelessness or is already homeless. Having a case in housing court will qualify. We'll go over a little bit more of that later on. Family has at least a 1-year lease to stay, or the apartment is rent stabilized or rent controlled. So the tenant has to show to HRA that they have the right to be there long term, and the requirement is that you have at least a 1-year lease, or you be entitled to reside there, as long as you're allowed to by law. Almost everyone has to pay a share. We'll talk a little bit more about what factors go into how much that share is. But unfortunately, nobody can live for free. Everyone who's eligible for cash assistance has to receive cash assistance. Anyone who's eligible for any other benefit must receive it. Someone who's not eligible for benefits, generally speaking, has to work. Almost everyone has to pay something or be part of the public assistance case. Normally, there's an arrears cap of $9,000. There are some exceptions, and we'll talk a little bit more, but $9,000 is the typical rent limit, arrears limit, I'm sorry. And then the tenant must use any other resources they have available to them, such as savings, to pay the arrears first. So, unfortunately, this program doesn't allow tenants to, hold on to any of their assets. Tenants do have to use whatever assets or resources they have available to pay their arrears down first, and then they may be eligible. I just received a note that the connection is choppy. I'm wondering if the connection is choppy for me or for...
Charles, I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. So I'll just continue, sorry. And then the monthly subsidy will depend on factors such as income, immigration status of the individuals, whether or not there are people that, you know, HRA will consider to be roommates. And then there are some budgeting rules. Budgeting happens when there's income in a household that receives public assistance. It's sort of the official way of calling what happens when HRA gives you less money. But those budgeting rules will apply as well. Next slide. Vanessa, do you want to go or should I go? Okay.
So just so you guys know, before we actually even get into the 7 major rules, just as Charles said, there are these minor rules that should be taken into consideration, but that's just truly on a case-by-case basis. But these are the 7 major rules in which everyone is, it's applicable to everyone. And at the end of it, we will walk you through the process of how we're just merely explaining the process. I mean, the program itself of Fheps, but at the end, we'll just kind of walk you guys through how to actually apply for Fheps. So again, so the first rule, going back to the slides, the first rule is the cash assistance / with the minor in the home. So there must be at least one person in the household that's in receipt of an active cash assistance. And there's a case, and there's a minor in the home. So there's a minor in the home. I think it's after that of 4 months. The fetus will count towards that of a minor in the household. A parent, a guardian, or a caretaker of a relative with a minor in the household, or a person with cash assistance that has a minor child under the age of 18 years old or 19 and is attending high school or is full-time equivalent. So again, if you're unfamiliar with cash assistance, many people refer to it as welfare, people refer to it as public assistance, people refer to it as cash assistance. Essentially, it just really is this cash assistance, a full active case, a case that's you're currently receiving benefits from HRA. So HRA, again, is the local agency that oversees the process. So you must be receiving cash assistance benefits. And there must also be a minor in the household. So that's kind of 2 in 1 actually for the cash assistance with minor in the home, the first rule. So we can just go on to the next slide. And just so it's clear, we can go back. Yeah. So the cash assistance case must be fully open for all family members who are required by law to be on the budget, and there can be sanctions and there can be no sanctions at the time of the application. So just to be clear, you must have a cash assistance case that is open a cash assistance case does not merely mean that of a SNAP case, which just means food stamps. You have to be receiving cash assistance and or eligible for cash assistance. And the case must be open at the time that the application is submitted. And essentially everyone in the household must be on your budget. That is required to be on the budget. So for instance, a family of 4, if you have a mother who's in the apartment with 4 children, all 4 children, and they are under the age of 18 or 19, and receiving full-time and under the age of 17, we'll say under the age of 17, should be on the cash assistance budget so that it can take into consideration the number of people in the household. And there can be no sanctions at the time of application. Sanctions is definitely something that comes from, it's really a long-winded kind of portion of cash assistance and HRA. And but essentially it just simply means that you could not have been penalized at some point or another for inaction or action on your budget, which for instance could be just simple as failing to recertify or report certain cash, things of that nature. But we can move on to the next rule. So the rule 2, eviction or exception. So the family must be facing homelessness or be homeless and meet one of the 6 sub-rules. So again, our primary focus is on that of those who are currently in homes or trying to move into a home. This is Fheps A. So essentially we can move on to the next slide. We can go back. Just, yeah. So again, you must be facing homelessness, or you must be essentially homeless. So, and you must satisfy one of the 6 sub rules. So we've just kind of highlighted the 3 popular or 3 most frequent sub rules that are applicable to most of our clients that we see on a day-to-day basis, which oftentimes includes essentially residing. If you live in a household in New York City and you're currently in housing court for rental arrears and or holdover case that can result in your eviction, then that would count as essentially, that would satisfy this requirement of facing homelessness. Because again, you are in the underway of a process that could result in your eviction. Another popular sub rule is, or more frequent sub rule is, within the last 12 months, you have been evicted or left a residence in New York City that was a subject of an eviction proceeding. So again, for instance, you were in a home, you're currently in a new home, but less than 1 year ago, you were in an apartment that you were evicted from, or you left a residence in New York City that was the subject of an eviction proceeding, meaning that you were in a house and essentially, you know, there was an eviction proceeding. It may not have resulted in an actual eviction, but it still was in the subject of an eviction proceeding. And then the third most frequent rule, scenario is residing in a New York City Department of Homelessness shelter or HRA shelter within the last 12 months prior to entering the shelter, and you have been evicted or left residence with eviction case. So again, if you, within the past 12 months of the time that you wish to submit your Fheps application, if you lived in a DHS shelter or an HRA shelter, then that makes you eligible. That would make you eligible for the Fheps program. We can go on to the next. So the family must have a 1-year lease to stay in the apartment from the time of approval if the apartment is not rent regulated. So as Charles alluded to, mentioned earlier, the people who are eligible for Fheps, essentially they oftentimes live in rent regulated apartments. So whether that's rent stabilized or it's a rent controlled apartment, most frequently is rent stabilized apartments. But you know, those apartments, it's not necessarily as pertinent. This rule is pretty much usually satisfied because in rent stabilized apartments and rent controlled apartments, for instance, there's like a certain level of guarantee that your lease will be renewed because there's such a limited reasons as to why you can't have a renewal lease presented to you. But for unregulated apartments, for those, for instance, living in a private home, maybe like a 2-family home, for instance, and you're renting out the first or second level of that home, you must present a 1-year lease, to the worker that's helping you to essentially be eligible for the Fheps program. And so then we can move on to the next rule. I believe this is actually continues. So I'll just finish this one up. So if the applicant, so this is a really common occurrence too. So a lot of people, you know, you'll say, okay, well, I'm not the tenant of record, which means that I'm not the person who's on the lease. Like I don't have the lease in my name, but I do live in that apartment. If you just simply live in an apartment and you still and all of these rules that we go through today are applicable to you, then you could be eligible for Fheps. So that's not really, shouldn't be a deterrent. So essentially, where the tenant of record, which means the person who's holding the lease, has an income at below 200% of the federal poverty levels, and the leaseholder has a lease or residency rights for at least 12 months at the time, and the applicant must submit proof. So there's a couple of, so this rule is a little janky because this rule it technically applies to both the person who has a lease in their name, but then it also applies to the person who is the applicant. So the applicant must submit proof of residency in the apartment. So if, again, you're not the actual person who has a lease in your name, you still do have to provide proof that you actually live in that apartment and that you actually are, you know, a resident of that apartment. So the applicant must be named as a co-tenant on the lease, or a court stipulation, or in a written agreement with the tenant of record, giving residency rights for at least 12 months at the time of approval. So again, if you're just simply a roommate, the lease is not in your name, that's perfectly fine. It's not really advisable, for instance, if you are, the apartment itself is the subject of an eviction proceeding, it's not really advisable to add yourself to the case, but sometimes in certain cases, it is advisable to add yourself to the case, only because for those purposes, the court, you can take that to HRA and say, hey, see, you know, I could potentially be evicted from this apartment if I'm not a recipient of the Fheps program, or if you're in a good relationship with the tenant of record, then you can just simply ask them to just write a letter, possibly more likely than not notarized, just saying that, you know, I basically give rights to this person to remain in this home for at least no less than 12 months. And then arrears period must match co-tenancy. So we did talk about this a little bit earlier, where there's a cap, and we'll talk about this more. But essentially Fheps, it's not only meant for an ongoing rent subsidy for people who are facing eviction, but it can also help pay rent arrears, which just simply means that, you know, let's say for instance, you've been living in an apartment for about 10 months and you have a rent of $1,200, but you've only been able to pay that of $1,000 each of those months. So then you have this back rent, what we call rent arrears. And then from there, essentially, those rent arrears can be paid through the Fheps program. There is a limitation currently of $9,000, but there are certain exceptions. But whatever the case may be, for this rule, we're talking about the arrears that accrued at the time of the application. It must be accrued while you actually lived in the apartment. So if you know you moved into the apartment and your roommate, for instance, who's the leaseholder, already had rent arrears, but you didn't live there while those arrears started to accrue, then you are not liable for those arrears. And more importantly, HRA will not pay for those arrears. So only where you have co-tenancy, only where you're living in the apartment and the applicant failed to provide their full rent, then that's when HRA will pay. So we can go to the next room. Charles, you can take a look.
Just a note for you, Vanessa, for as far as the interpreter, maybe if you can moderate the speed of your, just a bit for the interpreter. I think it.
Okay.
Thanks.
I do talk fast.
I spoken as an interpreter myself. It would be quite challenging.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you.
So then I'll talk a little bit more about the rule about the simple statement is that almost everyone pays a share. I'll talk a little bit more about this rule. So everyone who's eligible for cash assistance must be in receipt of cash assistance or have some type of verifiable income. If someone in the house, like living in your apartment, is not on the cash assistance case, they're considered a roommate by HRA, and they generally will have to pay a share of the rent. If a person does not have lawful immigration status, generally there are some complications to this, but generally speaking, HRA does not count their income at all, so they don't have to pay a share. But they also don't count towards the number of people in the households as it relates to the rent cap. So one of our last slides will have a chart with the maximum rent levels, and those are all based on number of people in the household. So if there are any members in the household who don't have lawful immigration status, the great thing is that their income in general is right now does not count. HRA doesn't consider it, but they don't count towards the head count either. Again, there are some complications. If there is someone who doesn't have lawful immigration status, but reports their income to HRA, there's something called Allen budgeting, which we won't get into. They may have a share, so there are exceptions to this, but this is the sort of general rule. And the rent share, I'm not going to do any calculations, but it's usually, you know, the rent divided by the number of people, and that person is responsible for their own share. You can have more than one cash assistance case in a household too. That's not a problem. Next slide. We talked about the arrears limit. The general rule is that the applicant must owe no more than $9,000. There are exceptions though. So HRA can add between $1,000 and $3,000 on top of that for certain circumstances. Unfortunately, home-based offices can't add to this. Home-based offices will often help tenants apply for Fheps, and home-based offices often have extra funding for tenants who have arrears, but it can't be added on top of whatever the Fheps application, whatever the Fheps approval would be for. In extreme cases, HRA can approve up to 14,000. You know, personally, I've had cases where HRA has approved way more than that. I think in our office, we've seen cases that are just much higher, like $20,000. But all of those cases involve really sad facts. You know, you want to consider whether or not anyone in your household has a disability, whether there's a child with special needs, like educational needs or special medical needs. Sometimes, you know, if there's a household where a parent has either recently been deported or is at risk of deportation, that may be considered some sort of, you know, hardship that may be a factor for HRA to consider in a case with high arrears. But the safest bet is to apply when the arrears are under $9,000. And it's possible for an advocate to submit an application to HRA when the arrears are at $9,000 and below, can submit an incomplete application, and then the application just needs to be updated and fixed within 6 months. So that's something that, you know, advocates will take advantage of sometimes, but that is, you know, one possibility. Next slide. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but Fheps has to be the last resort. So the applicant family can't have any other resources to pay the back rent. So, you know, if you're a household that just received money in a settlement, or if there's any money saved, sometimes, you know, things like insurance proceeds, so on and so forth, or a tax return, all of that money has to go towards the arrears before HRA will pay anything. So the family has to use any available savings, tax return funds, or any resources before they apply for Fheps. And just keep in mind that for HRA, the end of January, so January 31st until May, is what HRA considers to be tax season. HRA will ask applicants for copies of their tax returns. There are a few reasons for this, but one of them is to make sure that the household is paying whatever they receive in a refund towards their arrears. Next, and does Vanessa want to go, or should I? Okay.
So the last major rule that we'll cover is essentially like, what is the maximum rent? Let me try and slow down. What is the maximum rent that is allowed? So there's several factors that go into figuring out what the maximum rent is for the lease that can be charged. So it includes, you know, how many people are in the family that receive cash assistance, who else is in the home, and do they count towards the maximum rent? Is the family staying and paying? Meaning, are they staying in the house and are they actually paying rent, or are they not paying rent? Moving from one old apartment to a new one, or moving from a shelter. Was old rent the preferential, regulated, or unregulated? Most old Fheps. So those are some of the questions that kind of that HRA does assess when determining whether or not someone is eligible for Fheps. And most old Fheps, so just so you know, Fheps as we know it, Fheps, you know, which has the silent H. It actually used to be Fheps, which removal of the H. So you had that rent subsidy, you had Link 3, and you had city Fheps cases. But most of those cases have been converted to new Fheps as of December 2017. So that's not really something we'll focus on now. But if we go to the next slide, you'll see this chart, and I know it looks a little funky and you're probably wondering, you know, what is this? But essentially you'll see that, for instance, a family of 4 who has an active public assistance case and has an active cash assistance case should be receiving $450 in shelter allowance. So again, shelter allowance, I know, don't be thrown by the name. Although it is called shelter, it truly does mean shelter of as in a home. So it's not necessarily, it's not just for, you know, those who are in shelters. So you'll see, for instance, a family of 4 should be receiving, with an active public assistance case, $450 in shelter allowance. So this is monies that are going directly to the landlord that's being paid towards the rent. But with the Fheps program, because don't forget the S in Fheps stands for supplemental, we supplement that $450 base with $861, for instance. Again, this is just an example, but with about $861 totaling $1,311 towards the rent. So there is something, so again, we have to look to see how many people are in the household. So again, I'm using the example of 4 people. How many people are in the household? And then if we have people who, for instance, are receiving cash assistance of $450, and everyone in the household is on the cash assistance case, then that means that the cash assistance is the only income in the household. So then the maximum rent, the maximum subsidy would be that of $861, and then the total rent would be $1,311. There are, for instance, you cannot go over the rent amount of $1,311 for a family of 4. But where there are extenuating circumstances, we have something called the enhanced maximum, which here for a family of 4 would be $1,580. Those extenuating circumstances is something that you know, Charles kind of hinted at earlier, where he talked about, you know, extremely sad cases, households with several people with disabilities, you know, or really where the landlord just simply refuses to lower the rent to that of $1,311. So again, this chart right here, you don't have to memorize it or anything of the sort. When it's time to file an application, the advocate will essentially review this with you. But again, the numbers here at the end, 1048, 1096, those are the maximum rents for a regular Fheps application. And again, that's based on the number of people in the household. So we have to consider the number of people in the household and what is the maximum rent for each number, for the families of certain sizes, of certain number of people. But then if the rent is something higher than that, then it still cannot exceed the enhanced maximum. So I hope I kind of explained that as best as possible. I'm sure we'll have questions about it if not. So we can move on to the next slide. And so the maximum rent allowed for a rent regulated apartment cannot exceed the October 2020 maximum rent schedule if that is the legal rent. Only preferential rents must be at the level for the year. So especially for rent stabilized apartments, for instance, So for rent stabilized apartments, for instance, there is an agency that that sets the rent guideline boards. I'm sorry, it's rent guideline boards, and they set a vacancy and a list each year as to how much the rent can increase each year. So that rent increase will take effect in October of each year. So the maximum rent allowed for a rent regulated apartment cannot exceed the October 20, again, because we're now in October, which is the last, so October 2020 would be the last time that a rent increase could have legally been taken for for regulated apartments. So it just simply cannot exceed whatever that amount is. It's a little complicated. It is essentially, it's a little complicated, so I won't even really try to get into it. We just simply don't have enough time. But again, there is something called the RGB, and if you just look it up, you'll just see essentially it's it's an agency that essentially just tells landlords how much they can increase their rent by each year for 1 year and 2 year leases for regulated apartments throughout New York City. And if the family had a lease for 1 year, and last year was at the October 2019 level, the new lease can only increase up to the October 2020 level. So 1 year rent guideline increase, not more than 5% for unregulated lease signed in court. So if you're already in court, for instance, and you're an unregulated household, again, there's a differentiation between regulated households and unregulated households. So for instance, if you're in court and you are already in arrears and it's come time for you to sign a new lease, you cannot sign a lease that increases your rent more than 5% for that year if you know that you intend to apply for the Fheps program. Because again, that's one of the rules and you will be denied, potentially. Because of course, there's an exception to every exception. So, but we move on.
I'll just add that the chart that we included here has a date on it, and HRA these numbers will be updated every year, and they'll be updated to match the increases that are approved by the Rent Guidelines Board.
Right. So
you have to look at the chart for the year in which you intend to apply.
Right. So yeah, this is just what we were talking about earlier. There's 4 different ways to apply for, there are 4 different ways to apply for that of Fheps. And the first way is for that of access to apply on Access HRA. So for people who already have cash assistance cases, they should be pretty familiar with Access HRA. You should probably already have the app on your phone, or you can access it online, like on a desktop or a laptop, for instance. But essentially you would just go there and you could begin the application. We do have 2 PDFs that we're encouraging Palante to send out to the participants of today. We're just going through the bullet points right now, but it gives you essentially a little bit more detailed explanation on these 4 different ways that you can apply. It's actually also on Legal Aid's website. So if you want to visit Legal Aid's website, you can find it there as well. But pretty much if you have internet access and are comfortable on using online applications, you can upload documents through your phone on the computer, and you can begin the process by requesting a special grant request through the HRA website or the Access HRA mobile app. Again, this is for families who are already receiving cash assistance. And if the family is not receiving cash assistance, then you have to go through the Access HRA mobile app, or again, online, and then you can apply for specialist cash assistance. And then from there, you'd have to just essentially check off that there are rent arrears. So that's very, very important because a lot of people do not remember that step. You can apply for cash assistance, which is perfectly fine, but it doesn't address the arrears, the rent arrears, essentially the back rent that has not been paid. So you have to make sure that you check off that arrears have not been paid. And each document that you upload, do your best to just simply label it with your name, with your case number, and your phone number. From there, you'll receive a phone call from an HRA advocate, and they'll help you essentially complete the application. The phone call usually comes within about, I'll say it's been fairly quick turnaround. So anywhere between 48 to 72 hours, you should be receiving a phone call from HRA in regards to an application. The second one is that you can request a paper application. So you can request a paper application. Again, we do have the handouts so that you guys can kind of keep this information handy. But you can request, if you do not have an open case, by calling the HRA hotline at 718-557-1399. If you want to write it down, that's 718-557-1399. Or you can download the application on the website. And again, you must check off that there are rent arrears that are owed. It's extremely important to make sure that you let it be known at the time of applying for cash assistance, if you don't already have it, that there are rent arrears that are owed.
I'm going to repeat that number out there. Is it 718-557-1399? I'll post it.
Yes, it is. So you can ask the info line where to mail, fax, or drop off the completed application, and any supporting identifying like papers that are accompanying the application. And then HRA, after HRA does receive your application, again, your paper application, then you should be receiving a phone call. So obviously that's a little bit more difficult because it is in print. So the turnaround may not be as quick as doing it online. And honestly, it's just preferable to just do it online. Like if you can, to whatever extent that you feel comfortable, if you can maybe grab someone to help you through the process, that would honestly just be best. And then Charles, if you want to just get the last two.
So, for individuals who, have physical or cognitive impairments, you can request a home visit, and you can request a homebound application. The center that handles that is Center 90. The information, I think it's an email and the phone number are on the handout that will be distributed.
Yes.
But that is definitely possible. Since you're relying on the agency to send a worker, it won't be as quick as these other methods of doing the application. But certainly for clients who are disabled, that is that's an option. And then the last option is to apply at a job center. I don't know Susan Bond can add to this. I don't know what the current cap is on the number of visitors to job center. I think that there is still reduced capacity at the job centers. But if you're willing to go to the job center early enough, you can wait in line and try to speak with a caseworker in person. That is definitely still an option.
They actually like you to call that same phone number, 718-557-1399, and schedule an appointment at the job center so that not too many people are waiting online. And once there, they put people at a desk with a computer to try to do the application themselves. Of course, not everybody knows how to use a computer, and so then they might help you, but usually you're not sitting down with a worker. They send you home after you fill out the application on the computer, and then that you have an interview at home on the phone. And so it's not a great system. Right. But also drop off a paper application and copies of your papers at the centers. If you want to not mail them, that sometimes cuts down time. And they have lock boxes there so you can drop off your paper application and all your identity documents and rent documents. But as Vanessa said, if somebody can help you with the computer and do the application online, that's the fastest. I just helped somebody with a paper application, And then I had to mail it to their house, and then they had to mail it or fax it into the center. So it does take a lot longer. Or getting the home visit also is taking a long time during the pandemic because a lot more people, especially the elderly, are afraid to leave their homes and don't know how to use a computer. So anytime you can help a neighbor or somebody with the application process, it's really a nice thing to do.
Agreed. And so we're very clear. The moral of the story is try to apply online. That's definitely the moral, yes. But that actually concludes our presentation. And so if there are any questions, we'll take them now.
Should
Yeah.
I start with some of the questions, or because I have them up?
Yeah, I have them all as well, actually, Charles. What I'll do is I'll go ahead and read them. Yeah, I'll take care of reading out those questions, and then whoever wants to answer can just unmute. So actually, the first one that came in, and I think Charles did answer, but we'll read it out just to make it extra clear. Can NYCHA tenants apply for assistance?
So NYCHA tenants are not eligible for Fheps. I mean, you can always apply, but you're not eligible. They can't be in receipt of these funds. And the reasoning is that NYCHA housing is already subsidized. So you can't really combine subsidies together that way.
And then I think there was a comment, I'm not sure if it came from Charles or from, there was an explanation, right, that came after: if a parent or child does not have immigration status, they are not eligible for cash assistance and are not eligible for Fheps. So we need a child or parent with immigration status and eligible for cash assistance. That was a statement made.
Yeah, and let me further on that. So sometimes we'll have a citizen child and mom has no immigration status, so they would get Fheps for one. Sometimes we have mom has status and the child doesn't have status, so then we would still get Fheps for one. Sometimes we have a child with SSI and mom has cash assistance, so we get Fheps for one and the child pays a portion of their SSI, or mom pays it for the child. So there's all different, every family's different, and so the facts are specific to each family.
And is there another question that came in earlier? Is there a time limit of how long I can be on Fheps?
There is.
I'll answer.
Oh, go ahead.
So generally it's 5 years. However, in the past, the government has never cut anybody off. So the Fheps program started in 2017 in December, and so nobody has hit that 5-year limit yet. So they'll be hitting it in December of 22. But in the past, the government has never cut people off in the old Fheps program, or before Fheps, there was a lawsuit called Jiggets. So we've had some families where an infant was born and they had Fheps their entire life.
I will just say that this doesn't happen as often anymore, but it is important to make sure if you're receiving Fheps benefits that you're sending all renewal leases to HRA, because when your rent goes up, it won't, your subsidy won't automatically go up if HRA doesn't know what the new rent is. So it is very important that you submit any new leases, any new renewal leases to HRA. There is a way to do what's called a modification application, and those all have time limits. So it's important to do that as quickly as possible. The limit for Fheps is technically 5 years, but that doesn't mean that you can do nothing for your case for 5 years. You also as a tenant have to keep your public assistance case open and active. And if the case closes, unfortunately, you will have to then reapply for Fheps once your public assistance case reopens. So we do oftentimes have clients whose cases have closed for various reasons. And then we have to try to get them back on somehow.
So we do have a question in Spanish that just came in. So just stay on your English channels and I'll read that over, I'll read that myself on the Spanish channel. Buenas tardes, mi nombre es Claudia. Y yo ya intenté aplicar para este programa, pero siempre me dicen que tengo que estar en corte. Quería saber si ustedes me podrían ayudar con la aplicación. Gracias.
So through August,
Go ahead, Charles. Go ahead.
go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. So oops, I was on the wrong channel. That's why I confused myself. So through the end of August, HRA will be accepting applications from tenants without court cases, but the tenant does need to have received a rent demand from their landlord. The rent demand is a form, it looks just like a letter where the landlord says, you tenant owe X amount of money. And that's the first step before starting a court case. So, the landlord has to show that they're considering suing you, that they're in the process of suing you when they can.
Yeah, I was just gonna add on, like, I'm just actually quite proud. Legal Aid is kind of at the forefront of this fight, because for so long we've just said to HRA, there should be not even just HRA, but OTDA, again, the state program, that essentially there should just be no need for people to have to face an eviction proceeding in order for them to get this type of subsidy. So as Charles said, through the month of August, which is coincides with, let me slow down, which coincides with the eviction moratorium that does end August 31st as of now. Essentially, you can go to a community-based organization such as like Homebase, and they can help you with the Fheps application without you having been sued in court. So Claudia, if you wanted to get on Fheps before and that's still something that interests you, I encourage you to kind of restart that process. I know it's not the best, but I do encourage you to restart it again.
And this is relatively new. Even a few months ago, this was not HRA's policy. HRA did require that there be a housing court case. So this is pretty new. The fact that you were told that you were rejected and told that you needed to be in court, while unfortunate, it makes a lot of sense because this is a new HRA policy. And it's simply because of the COVID-19 pandemic and related lockdowns.
So definitely keep the questions coming. We want to encourage as much as possible to text through the chat or the Q&A. I'll read another one out. Do I have to be working in order to receive Fheps? I can't prove income.
So there are a few components to that question. If you are eligible for cash assistance or disability benefits or some other, unemployment benefits are usually too high to qualify. But if you're eligible for any other type of benefits, that might work with the Fheps application as long as there's one person at least who has an active cash assistance case and one minor child in the household. If you are not part of the cash assistance case and you're not in receipt of something like disability benefits, then in general, yes, you do have to be working. Now, in terms of proving income, It's obviously easiest if you have pay stubs, because you can just show those pay stubs to HRA. There are certain circumstances where other documentation might be sufficient if you have a letter from an employer, but it's really best if, you know, if you just started a new job and you have a letter from them explaining that you were just hired and you're going to make a certain amount of money. This is not the general, you know, rule. If you're someone who doesn't have lawful immigration status, then you're, as of now, HRA is not going to be looking at your income anyway.
What can I do if I was wrongfully denied? This was a question that came up a little bit earlier, so I'm not sure if it was in reference to something that was discussed at that moment. So hopefully there can be a tie-in.
So just to be, so just kind of to going back to the last question, I also definitely want to emphasize for the person who asked that question about employee letters. You know, just really asking your employer to just, even if you don't have the pay stubs to show proof of your employment, then definitely the employee letter will suffice. Oftentimes people just simply include their employers' like contact information, you know, just in case, just as further proof that this is a legitimate job. I actually do work here. Sometimes HRA will actually contact them, sometimes they don't. But going back to the question that was just asked, if you were wrongfully denied, for instance, if you do have cash assistance, and this is a program, Fheps is a program that you otherwise should have been entitled to, you can file for a fair hearing. However, honestly, it's not even advisable to actually apply for a fair hearing. Or actually, technically, you haven't actually received the benefit yet. So technically, you haven't been wrongfully denied. But for instance, if you went to the center and you actually did put an application, they did deny you, then unfortunately, because it wasn't a benefit that you were already in receipt of, there's no essential wrongful denial. However, you can reapply again. They do provide a reason as to why you are denied every time there is a denial. And you know, whoever the advocate is that's helping you through the process, you can essentially just get information from them. Just make sure they explain to you, you know, for instance, maybe you didn't submit good enough proof of a roommate in the apartment, or their job, for instance, or maybe there's someone on the cash assistance budget that's not on the cash assistance budget that needs to be added. Those things are actually explained to you at the time of denial. So whatever is explained to you as to the reason why your case was denied, then you should reapply, having corrected the that point of denial. So it's definitely something to be cognizant of, and just make sure you understand why the application itself was denied in the first place.
Vanessa, what's the phone number if you need advice for housing court or you need a lawyer?
For what is it, for housing court?
Yeah, so if somebody needs Fheps and they're in court, what's the phone number to get a free lawyer?
Oh, so it's actually Housing Court Answers. I actually don't have the number handy, but I can look it up and I'll put it in the chat. But you can call 311 and they can reroute you to it. But it's Housing Court Answers. And if you contact 311, they will give you the number for it. If I'm able to find it before this closes, I'll put it in the chat.
And they can also help you with Fheps. If you get a free lawyer and you're in housing court, they can do your Fheps application for you. So that's always a good thing to have a lawyer doing it for you and representing you in housing court. If you haven't been sued, like and you owe that money and landlord will give you a rent demand, HRA will do the application for you most of the time, But if you have a problem with your Fheps not being done, you can be referred via 311 to get advice, or you can email one of us and we can talk to you about your case and see where the best place to get you help.
What is the difference between state and city versus city Fheps?
So essentially, city Fheps was the New York City's answer to state Fheps. City Fheps kind of caught it's a catch-all essentially for or more so that's how it began anyway. It was a catch-all for all the people that were not eligible for Fheps, because again, one of the biggest components, well, it's one of the major rules of Fheps is that there has to be a minor in the household. So city Fheps was the answer for those people who did not have a minor in the household. In the more recent years, it's become a little bit more stringent as to who exactly actually is eligible for city Fheps. I believe it's that of veterans. If you've lived in a DHS shelter, if you have a DHS shelter history, and again, not unlike Fheps. For instance, you know, if you lived in an HRA shelter or a DHS shelter, you would be eligible for Fheps, but city Fheps, again, just limits it to that of a DHS shelter history. So yeah, it's become a little bit more stringent as to who is eligible for city Fheps, but essentially, again, it's really geared more towards those who do not have minors in the household. And I don't remember the other two categories of those who are eligible at this time, but that's essentially the primary difference. Again, those who are Fheps for minors, for people who have minors in the household, and city Fheps is for those who do not have minors in the household. Susan, I know you know this by heart. So what are the other two?
So the other two categories are somebody who has adult protective services. So
Yes.
if there's a very mentally or physically disabled adult who lives by themselves and they could not navigate the shelter system, they would be eligible for city Fheps if they meet if their rent is low enough, $12.65 right now for a single person to keep them in their home. And the other group is somebody who's living in a rent-controlled apartment. So city Fheps covers, as Vanessa said, people who don't qualify for state Fheps, so other adults and other households. And then if somebody's in shelter, there's broader categories for people to exit shelter with city Fheps. So that would include seniors to get out of shelter. It includes working households with minor children who are working 30 hours a week. So with city Fheps, you could have a cash assistance case, or you might just be a working family. So city Fheps is a bigger program. It encompasses more different types of families and households than Fheps. And we hope over time with progressive mayors, it will grow bigger. And last week, the city council voted to raise the city Fheps levels to way higher than what they are now, because $12.65, it's very hard to rent an apartment for a single person. They're going to go up to $1,900 in January, the levels. And then we hope that the Fheps levels will go up next year, or we have to sue the state again to raise those levels. So we keep having to sue the state to do the right thing.
And I guess, yeah, Charles had an answer for that last question that came in, a follow-up from Claudia.
So we have a question that was typed in the chat in Spanish. and it's asking if the Fheps program will count towards being considered a public charge if you're an immigrant. Public charge is indeed a concern. In general, if you're, I mean, there are lots of exceptions, but in general, if you're an immigrant, who wishes to eventually convert your status to becoming a permanent resident or a citizen, in general, you don't want to be receiving ongoing cash assistance. So you don't want to have an active public assistance case. However, if there is, a child who's a citizen, or if there's some other, person living in the apartment who's a citizen, they can be receiving cash assistance, and those are benefits for them. It doesn't necessarily count. If you are a parent and your child is a citizen, you can apply for benefits on their behalf, and that doesn't count negatively towards you. Depending on the type of application you're doing, if you're looking to adjust status, it can be different, but oftentimes you will be fine. Oftentimes it's fine for a parent to receive benefits on behalf of their child. The exceptions that I can think of are when someone is, we call it sponsoring someone else, when there's a family-based petition. If your household is in receipt of, an ongoing subsidy like Fheps, then it can demonstrate that you don't have the ability to support the person that you're sponsoring. But just in general, it's fine as long as they're not benefits in your name.
And if you're about to change your status to get a green card or to become a citizen, you don't want to be on benefits at that time. But if you have a housing emergency and your application is going to take 5 years with the federal government to get status, it's usually fine to be getting benefits now. And things are much different under the Biden administration.
I mean, I would just say that this is something that is worth speaking to a lawyer about if you can connect to a legal services provider, either through the Legal Aid Society or Legal Services NYC. There are a lot of organizations that have lawyers that can answer these types of questions. Each case is a little different. So, if you're doing a family-based petition and you're sponsoring someone else, then, there is potential for concern, but it's often fine if the benefits are not, in your name. And since we have this question here, I will say that other forms of assistance do not count as being a public charge. So if you are applying for what we often call a one-shot deal, a rental arrears grant, that usually doesn't count towards being a public charge because that's one-time assistance. That's not ongoing assistance. And there's a program that I believe Susan Bond may be speaking about soon called ERA, Emergency Rental Assistance Program, I think is what it stands for. And for that program, any tenant that qualifies based on income and a few other things, can receive that funding regardless of immigration status. And since that's one-time assistance, that also doesn't count. I'm pretty certain that at least now that we're in the Biden administration, food stamps will also not count. But that was something that the Trump administration was trying to change.
And yeah, I definitely agree with everything Charles has said. And just so it's clear, I did put in the HCA, the Housing Court Answers number in the chat. So I'll just read it out loud. That's 212-962-4795. That's 212-962-4795. You can give them a call for, especially for those more intricate matters dealing overlapping between housing and immigration. And they can refer you to a legal service provider to kind of give you the, walk you through that, those type of scenarios.
De parte de Claudia, muchas gracias por explicarme.
Of
De
course.
nada.
Okay, so that will be like the concluding of our webinar tonight. Thank you so much to our presenters, Vanessa and Charles and Susan of the Legal Aid Society for informing our attendees on Fheps and how to apply and taking us on a detailed step-by-step on the process. So if you do, if you're behind a rent and you need rental assistance, you should apply to Fheps, but please take all this information that was provided tonight into account. We will be sending out a Fheps fact sheet that was provided to us by the Legal Aid Society to everyone who attended tonight. So, you know, just so if you have any more questions, you could look at that. And also you can call us, Palante at 212-491-2541, or email us at palante@palanteharlem.org, and we could help you as well. Thank you again to the Legal Aid Society. This was a very, very informative webinar tonight, and I appreciate each and every one of you. And yeah, so Robert, do you want to put up the poll?
It's up.
Oh, it's
Definitely,
up.